Some of you have noticed, I'm sure have noticed, that Elizabeth Warren has become very chummy with the Democratic Party establishment. She has been kind of cozying up with not even just the Democratic establishment, but just the establishment in general. And she's been kind of getting along with the likes of many like top CEOs of banks, like J.P. Morgan Chase. She was, in an article I covered in a couple of other podcasts, she was kind of documented as having a conversation with the head of J.P. Morgan Chase, the CEO of J.P. Morgan Chase, which is Jamie Dimon, and they kind of they documented that on mainstream outlets. I think it was Bloomberg when I covered it, and that's a pretty big deal, and that's something that progressives are really looking at, and it's something they're noticing. And for somebody like myself, it's definitely something that's standing out, and it's something that it definitely worries me, and it makes me wonder about what her intentions are, and whether she's going to truly push for like the progressive policies that I'm advocating for as a progressive, and because she's not progressive, and she's somebody that, in my opinion, is very very opportunistic, and very she kind of picks her spots, and she likes to say things and do things in certain ways that's going to only be palatable for it's going to be palatable for the establishment, and it's going to benefit the establishment ultimately. But the wording caters more to progressives. It caters more to what they want, and what people like me like to hear. But then ultimately, behind closed doors, she's going to be saying other things, and that's basically how it's kind of being. That's kind of the case when it comes to, now we don't know what conversations she's having behind closed doors, but there's no doubt that the conversations are not the same as the kind of things that she's saying in like a speech, or like a town hall she does somewhere in middle of the country, where she's supposed to actually push for progressive policies and ideas. And the worry is that she's going to just kind of say those things, and then when she has the opportunity, she's just going to flip and going to say something completely different, when she's behind closed doors. So that's why we should definitely know what's going on behind closed doors, but we're never going to know, because she's going to obviously keep that secret. And it's much different than what Bernie Sanders does, which is Bernie Sanders is just honest and open, no matter where he is or who he's talking to. He pretty much says the same thing no matter what, where he is. And majority of the time he's around kind of big town halls with like, people around sitting there, and, he's repeating the same speeches and laying out the same policies and stuff. And that's what people like to hear. So anyway, I wanted to get into a couple of articles here. It's actually two separate articles from two different publications that were released about Elizabeth Warren, cozying up with the establishment. And I just found it very curious. There was two different articles, two different publications talking about the same exact thing. And this is kind of a manufacturing consent. This is a smoke signal from the establishment, or at least from the media, to the establishment, letting people know, like, oh yeah, wink, wink, nod, nod, like, don't worry, she's on our side. So like, let's put it out there in the media so that essentially the public figures and stuff out there read this stuff, and they see that, like, oh, okay, good. We know which side she's on, and we know what she's going to say, and we know that she's going to be there for us, and not necessarily the progressive, the crazy radical progressives. Let's see. So let's get to the first article here. This one is from the New York Times. The title of the article is "What Elizabeth Warren is Quietly Telling Democratic Insiders." And the article is by Jonathan Martin. So let's get to the body of the article. It says, when Senator Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts addressed a few hundred donors last week at a fundraiser for the Democratic National Committee, she called for, quote, big structural change, and hurled her familiar populist lightning bolts at the forces of concentrated wealth. But Ms. Warren did not attend the event just to recite her stump speech. She had another, more tailored message for the Democratic check writers, state party leaders, and committee members who were gathered at the elegant Fairmont, San Francisco. Quote, last year I was running for re-election, but I didn't hold back, she said, reminding attendees that in the midterms she had helped more than 160 congressional candidates and nearly 20 hopefuls in governor's races. In fact, I raised or gave more than $11 million, helping get Democrats elected up and down the ballot around the country, and sent contributions to all 50 state parties, the national committees, and the redistricting fight. Her point was easy to grasp. While her liberal agenda may be further left than some of the Democratic establishment would prefer, she is a team player who is seeking to lead the party, not stage a hostile takeover of it. And that last part of that paragraph is clearly a shot at Bernie Sanders, because Bernie Sanders wants to do a hostile takeover of the Democratic Party. He wants to get progressives in there instead of what Elizabeth Warren is basically saying here, which is, oh yeah, I want to get Democrats, that are already in there reelected, and I want to get like more Democrats in there who are kind of the same thing as the ones that are already there. Doesn't want to actually get any kind of progressives in there. She wants to get people that are, are going to be subservient to the Democratic insiders, the strategists, the consultants, and also obviously subservient to the lobbyists too. And that's clearly a shot at him for sure. So, and establishment media, mainstream media always does that kind of stuff. They always want to take a shot at Bernie in one way or another. So the next paragraph says, as Ms. Warren steadily rises in the polls, she is working diligently to protect her left flank, lining up with progressives on nearly every issue and trying to defuse potential attacks from supporters of Senator Bernie Sanders of Vermont. I'm with Bernie, she said. She responds when asked about what is perhaps the most contentious issue of the primary race, Medicare for all. By the way, she does not support a full implementation of Medicare for all like Bernie Sanders does. She keeps talking about how she supports pathways to it and supports certain policies that are the certain kind of like framework of what Medicare for all is. But she's always talking about different pathways, and we're going to get there eventually, and then we need to strengthen Obamacare, and also it's just a lot of buzzwords to cater to the establishment and make sure that they know that she doesn't want to destroy Obamacare, which Medicare for all does not do. All Medicare for all does is improve upon Obamacare. But the thing that they don't like is because since Obamacare was one of the one of the bigger accomplishments of President Obama, they want to maintain that legacy as much as possible because they know how popular, because President Obama is a very popular, president, in his post period, it's that period of time after he's been, president, he's very popular. So they want to try and push his name out there as much as possible, even if it's going to be for Obamacare. And then like if there's any other, policy that has his name on it, they want to push it. And so that's just one of them, and they want to maintain that. Whereas if you do Medicare for all, you're completely overhauling the system. And since Bernie has been pushing for that so hard, they don't want to make that the cornerstone or the main thing standing out about the Democratic Party. They want it to be something that was an accomplishment by an establishment Democrat like President Obama. So the next paragraph here says, yet publicly and even more in private, she is signaling to party leaders that far from wanting to stage a quote, political revolution in the fashion of Mr. Sanders, she wants to revive the beleaguered Democratic National Committee and help recapture the Senate while retaining the House in 2020. In phone calls, text messages, and small gatherings before her rallies, as well as in one-on-one meetings over hot tea at her Washington condominium, Ms. Warren is simultaneously courting and assuring Democratic town leaders, statewide officials, and the chiefs of the country's largest unions. The outreach is not just an effort to avoid the confrontational approach Mr. Sanders took in 2016 when he inveighed against party insiders and the committee itself, which he correctly believed was favoring Hillary Clinton. I'm surprised they're admitting that, but okay. Correctly believed was favoring Hillary Clinton. Ms. Warren is also trying to allay concerns about Democrats that as a progressive candidate proposing sweeping change, she may not have enough mainstream appeal to compete with President Trump in the general election. By the way, this is something that I've said a million times over. I can't stand how they keep referring to Elizabeth Warren as a progressive. She is not a progressive. They keep repeating it again and again and again. They keep saying progressive. I'm like, okay, I'm a progressive. I'm somebody that believes in leftist, progressive, democratic socialist policies and views and, political views. That's what I am. She isn't. She believes in the label of the progressive. And that's what a lot of people that are on the establishment left and the people that don't like Bernie Sanders, they like to hijack that term. And that term has definitely been hijacked. And they like to hijack and use it as their own and then pretend like they're the ones that are actually progressive. And, and to be fair, a lot of people that are, people that I agree with, they like to call themselves, I'm a democratic socialist and I'm a whatever socialist or even communist. And, I agree with those people to many, to some extent. And, there's a lot of things like that are more like nuanced. I'm like, I don't fully agree with that, but I can see your position. But I still call myself a progressive because I'm not that far left. I'm left. I'm definitely far to the left on the spectrum, especially if you do like a political compass test, which is politicalcompass.net. If you go there, you can do your own test. And I'm very much like a left libertarian. I call myself a constitutional progressive because I believe in the Constitution, and I think a lot of that is kind of stems from that mentality that I am a libertarian, left libertarian essentially, not a libertarian, left libertarian, which is basically like a far left libertarian, far left, leftist, but you believe in a lot of freedoms and, you're against like NSA spying and endless wars, imperialism, stuff like that. That's basically what a left libertarian is. So continuing on here, it says, Ms. Warren's wooing could prove important should the nominating contest deadlock at the Democratic National Convention next summer. Many of the officials she is courting are so-called superdelegates who are able to cast a binding vote should the primary go beyond a first ballot. Beyond the potential electoral advantages, the relationships Ms. Warren is cultivating could prove just as powerful for symbolic purposes. Ms. Holland attended the San Francisco fundraiser sporting a Warren lapel pin, just a few days after she introduced and defended Ms. Warren at a forum dedicated to Native American issues in Iowa, after being sharply criticized from the right and the left for claiming Native American ancestry. Ms. Warren has apologized and taken down a 2018 video from her campaign website in which she trumpeted the results of a DNA test examining her heritage. I think it's Holland. It's HAA, 2 A's, LAND, Holland. Ms. Holland said that Ms. Warren helped raise money for her campaign last year and that the two had met in the senator's office and over tea in Ms. Warren's condominium this year. While Ms. Warren has been careful to avoid directly criticizing Mr. Sanders, her regular references to being a capitalist withstanding, she is also quietly taking steps within the party to make clear that she does not want to create a competing power base should she become president. And so there's a kind of a big thing that's going around. I'm going to be covering it on another podcast later this week, on another episode. But there's a lot of talk about how Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, they don't want to go after each other. Bernie Sanders specifically saying he doesn't want to attack her. So I'm going to be covering that at some point, and they're kind of already broaching that subject here. And the next part says, Ms. Warren's outreach, though, extends well beyond the committee. Armed with call sheets compiled by her staff, the senator spends much of her time in transit on her phone, dialing up lawmakers, local party leaders, and liberal activists. If she is not talking on the phone, she is often texting or writing personal notes. Ms. Warren's campaign events often begin out of public view when she meets with a small group of Democratic officials in gatherings, called clutches, quote clutches, for pictures and a few minutes of conversation. While the size of her crowd last week in St. Paul, roughly 12,000, her campaign said, drew headlines and attention on social media, her meeting beforehand with a few state lawmakers may have been even more memorable for them. So it's clear that she's definitely doing an outreach. She's trying to outreach the Democratic Party officials and insiders as much as possible. She's trying to, garner that support so that she can, like they said, so that she can, get the, so like if the the primary does go to a second ballot and, they have to take it that far, she wants to be as competitive as possible. So she's trying to make inroads into the party as much as possible, whereas Bernie Sanders is making inroads with the people. And when you make inroads with the people, you're going to piss off the establishment because they feel like they're ignoring you. And in the case of Warren, the people are going to feel like they're ignoring them. Now, I think with the case of Warren, I feel like that there's just so much, like there are just so many loyalists to the Democratic Party that they feel like, oh, well, she's a team player. I know that she's on my side, which is not really true, but I know she's on my side because she's talking to me, but she's also talking to the Democratic Party, and she's catering to the Democratic Party. So many people are, not even, they're just Democratic voters. It's not like they're part of the Democratic Party in regard to like being like politicians or anything, or even, what you call it, like being volunteers or something, and if they are, maybe even if they are volunteers, it's very little. But even if they're not volunteers, they still feel like, oh, well, you have to be committed to the Democratic Party and to the Democratic officials and all the other politicians that are in the party. And because it's all about, with these kind of people, even the people that again are not in the, specifically politicians, there's regular people, those people, to them, it's all about loyalty. You have to be loyal to a certain kind of, team. You got to be team blue. Either you're team blue or you're team red. That's it. You can't be anything in between, or even even if you're not in between. Even if you're past the team blue, you're even more. What if you're team green, right? Team Green Party or something. You can't do that. The policies, because the policies of the Green Party are much more far to the left than the Democrats. But the people that are loyal to the Democratic Party don't want that. They don't want it to go too far. Even those people that are not the politicians, are just voters. You have to be loyal to Democrats or else. That's it. And it doesn't matter about the policies for them. So that was a New York Times article I read for you. So there's now an article from another publication, The Atlantic. And this one is a little bit more of the same stuff, but I just wanted to give you guys these different details. It's a little bit of a different framing. It gets into like different kinds of like other politicians that are also favored by the establishment, but it's mainly about Elizabeth Warren. So this one is from The Atlantic. It's written by Edward Isaac Dover. The title for the piece is Elizabeth Warren manages to woo the Democratic establishment. So it's very straightforward and basically tells you what the deal is there. So let's get to the body here. And then it says here, so it starts off by saying, Joe Biden is ostensibly the candidate of the Democratic establishment, but it was Elizabeth Warren who's built her career on trying to challenge the status quo, who spent the weekend wowing party insiders. At this point in Warren's campaign, it's not a surprise anymore when she spends hours working a, quote, selfie line after a major event, as she did following two massive rallies she's held in the past week. But it was a surprise when more than 150 of the Democratic Party's biggest donors, not candidates or even politicians that are in the party, donors, similarly lined up on Thursday night after her speech at a dinner here, and it struck even some of the Democrats waiting to take photos with her. Here is referring to San Francisco, they were referring to San Francisco a couple times in the New York Times article too. That's where the fundraiser was taking place. Here it says, the next part says, "These are people who should not like her," said one attendee who spoke to me on the condition of anonymity to avoid showing favoritism, and they love her. The next day at the summer meeting of the Democratic National Committee, party members were on their feet cheering when she took the stage for a brief address. When he spoke there, Senator Cory Booker of New Jersey seemed to land more applause lines overall. A few other candidates were also received warmly, including Senator Bernie Sanders of Vermont, who gave a notably conciliatory speech about the proud legacy of the Democratic Party that perhaps no one could have imagined him delivering after his burned down the DNC campaign in 2016. But it was the Massachusetts senator who got a standing ovation before she even said a word, and another as soon as she finished speaking. From the start, Warren's campaign was built on the theory that she's an outsider whom insiders can live with, and an insider who has credibility with outsiders. In 2016 terms, someone who can attract both Sanders and Hillary Clinton voters. Primary voting is months away. The DNC's 2020 convention is almost a year from now, but on Friday afternoon in the huge Bland Hotel ballroom where the DNC meeting was held, Warren's theory seemed to be working out. So, when they say that she's receiving standing ovations and she's receiving like a lot of like people that are like loving her, this is more party members, the people that are loyal to the Democratic Party, but not necessarily donors. Because when you're a member of the party, and that's a very vague term too, by the way, that doesn't really get into the details of who those people are. Those are just people that are members of the party, but are not necessarily people that are like, giving money to the party, but maybe they're like a congressman or a congresswoman, or maybe they're an advisor, maybe they're, a consultant, something like that, or maybe they're just a pundit on TV that declares themselves as a Democrat and attends these events. You never know. It's very, very vague. So you can't get a handle on what that is. And the fact that she's receiving such a warm kind of ovation and, response is very noteworthy of the fact that she's getting a lot of support within the party insiders, and they're obviously, like it said here, they're banking on the fact that she's also going to get that same response from outsiders and the people that support Bernie Sanders. Now, I can tell you something right now. A good chunk, I'm not saying all of them, but a very, very, very good chunk of people that support Bernie Sanders, who I know and I've interacted with and I am affiliated with on social media, and I speak to, and I'm in DM groups with, and I'm connected with these people. I know for a fact that these people do not support Elizabeth Warren. They would not vote for her if she was the top of the ticket, even if Bernie Sanders was the VP, let alone if Elizabeth Warren was the one running. They would not vote for her. And I can tell you that that's something that's where I am too. I can't see myself voting for Elizabeth Warren if she's the nominee. Now, if you asked me that 3-4 years ago, if she ran in 2016, which apparently she was thinking about, and Bernie Sanders was encouraging her to run in 2016, but then he decided to run when she didn't, probably because she was trying to up her status as more of like a party insider, which is what she's doing now. And but if you had asked me back then, I would have probably said yes. Now it's a completely different story. And, if you ask somebody like Bernie, he's going to be like, no, definitely vote for it. He's going to be encouraging people to vote for her. Now, to be fair, he was encouraging people to vote for Hillary too. So, and Bernie has become he's become a lot less combative towards the Democratic Party and the establishment. I mean, the people that he has advising his campaign sound good when they talk and the things that they say, but a lot of them are party insiders, and one of them is Ari Robinhoft, who is the former, I think, president of Media Matters, which is the one, Media Matters for America, which is owned by David Brock, and David Brock is a big-time Hillary supporter, party insider or whatever, former advisor to, I think, to Hillary, right? No, he was more of he was an advisor, but he wasn't like an official, he wasn't an official like advisor type, like kind of like the people that like work for her, but he was certainly on her side, no doubt about it. And he's notably very anti-Bernie as well. So, but yeah, Ari Robinhoft, which is one of the, I think he is the I want to say his spokesperson. I think Bernie's spokesperson, and then he also has Faz Shakir, who is he's also another party insider. He used to work for Harry Reid, and that's somebody that Bernie Sanders hired onto his campaign so that he could, again, get a little bit more in with the insiders in the party. My feeling is that probably they could be a little bit more progressive than maybe a lot of other, so-called advisors in the party, but I don't know. I really have my doubts because those people aren't really progressive at all. Now, what they're saying it certainly could be progressive, of course, just like, what a lot of time Elizabeth Warren, like I said, says things that are progressive, but they're really not. And that's just progressive in name only. So, but, it's the problem is that ultimately you have to worry about who is aligned with who's in what camp, who's gonna be serving the establishment, who's not gonna be, who's gonna be serving the people, and that's the worry with somebody like Elizabeth Warren. So continuing on here, it says, she stretches across a broad spectrum of Democrats, said Don Fowler, a DNC chair in the 1990s, a longtime Clinton family loyalist. That's notable. Clinton family loyalist giving praise to Elizabeth Warren is a big deal. And someone who's been to more DNC meetings over more election cycles than most people in Democratic politics today. Explaining what he thinks her appeal is to establishment Democrats, Fowler told me that for all of Warren's talk of, quote, big structural change, by fundamentally reworking the economy, quote, she does not include in her presentation the implication of being against things, except the current president. See, that's what they want. They want somebody that can say the things that you want to hear, but ultimately you just have to be anti-Trump. As long as you're anti-Trump, that's all it's really about. And if you heard Bernie Sanders in 2016, he was much more anti-establishment Democrats and establishment in general, but establishment Democrats and also anti-Trump. Now you can hear him being a lot more anti-Trump, and you don't hear Bernie being as anti-establishment. I'm sorry, and as anti-establishment Democrats, and certainly establishment in general. But Bernie is not taking on the Democrats as much as he should, and that's very, very unfortunate. I hate to be bringing up Bernie's name so much in an article about Elizabeth Warren, but this is something people need to know, and they need to see that what Elizabeth Warren is doing. So what she is doing now, she didn't do in 2016. What Bernie Sanders is doing now is not what he did in 2016. You see what I'm saying? So it's like they're running very not parallel, but they're running on that same kind of line next to each other, on the same kind of lines next to each other. But Bernie is a little bit further back because he's not as he hasn't progressed as forward as to become as a favorite of the establishment as Elizabeth Warren is. She's become much more of a fan of a kind of a hero to Democratic establishment types than Bernie has. Of course, she's never going to be liked by the establishment because of what happened in 2016. But Warren is somebody that is trying to garner a lot more of that praise and a lot more of that attention because she knows that it's ultimately going to lead to her possibly, being the nominee and all that stuff. So it's clear that, when she's getting praise from, Clinton loyalists, that's a very big deal for sure. So the next part here says, Warren's insider-outsider routine is one reason Democratic operatives and analysts told me and one another in private conversations that they've begun to see her as the odds-on favorite to win her party's nomination. However, a few of the Democrats I spoke with noted that her positioning could become a trap, with Sanders and Warren expected to battle even more intensely in the coming months. The change-hungry part of the Democratic base might begin to ask why establishment insiders seem so comfortable with her. Jay Jacobs, the chair of the New York Democratic Party, told me a few hours after Warren's Friday speech that although his politics aren't as far left as Warren's, quote, there wasn't a thing she said today that I could not have written. Jacobs, who was made chair by the Biden backing Governor Andrew Cuomo, added, "The times do call for bolder action. I hope Sanders supporters see Warren's broadening support as a good thing and won't now cynically try to paint her as beholden to insiders, because she's not." Yeah, right. Said a DNC member who isn't currently committed to any candidates and who spoke on the condition of anonymity. And they finished off that with saying, "We will see." No, Elizabeth Warren is being seen as she's definitely being seen as a Democratic insider, not an outsider for sure. Like, again, I know that Sanders supporters are going to vote, majority of them, just like they did for Hillary. Majority of Sanders supporters, if not higher than Hillary in 2016, are going to vote for Warren if she's the nominee. There's zero doubt about that. I have no doubt that she's going to do that. It's unfortunate, but that's the reality. And now whether, that's ultimately going to mean that she's going to become president, assuming she is the nominee. If that's ultimately going to be enough for her to become president and beat Trump, I don't know. And that's assuming that she can even beat Trump in the sense of attracting voters that are going to be like, yeah, we don't want Trump, we want this other person. Definitely the appeal, if it's going to be Bernie against Trump, the appeal is definitely going to be more for Bernie, because he's what Trump pretends to be. Trump pretends to be a man of the people, pretends to be, standing up for the little guy when he's really not. Bernie actually does that, so it's completely different. Warren is not like that. Warren is much more of the wonky, establishment kind of technocratic, I don't know if it's technocratic, but much more wonkier type. And she's much more the person that, she's like a very Obama type figure, she likes to be like that. She likes to be wonky. She likes to give long-winded speeches and give explanations like a teacher. Because Barack Obama was a professor, I believe, right? He was a professor at, he was a Harvard Law professor. So he was a Harvard Law professor. He was an Ivy League guy. So was Elizabeth Warren. She's been a professor too. And she's also an Ivy League type. So the establishment likes these type of people. And, aside from her words, her more progressive language and her words back, many years ago, even when she was pushing for the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, back then people were they were scared of her. But now they're much more comfortable with her. It's clear. So the next part says, just like every other group of voters, DNC members who have their own interests, and Warren tried to appeal to the things that make them tick. In her speech on Thursday, she reminded the audience that in March of 2018, she wrote $5,000 checks to each state party from her campaign account, part of an overall $11 million account she raised for Democratic Party efforts. During the midterms, she also endorsed and campaigned for candidates across the country. Her work on behalf of other Democrats is likely helpful with the "what have you done for me lately" types who live for these major meetings of Democrats. And even if most DNC members are staying studiously neutral in the primaries, several of them told me they like what they've seen in the massive ground operation Warren is assembling in the early voting states. To those who spend their professional lives thinking about campaign mechanics, this is alluring. To her advantage, it appears as though she did not let the growing pains of the early stage of her campaign sidetrack her from creating an infrastructure, said Trav Robertson, the Democratic Party chair in South Carolina, one of the early states where campaign action is already underway. Her campaign's been fascinating to watch, he told me. It's a study of steady and slow wins. Slow wins the race. By the way, when it comes to the state of, it's the state of South Carolina and kind of more urban type areas, the places that have more black votes, minority votes, Elizabeth Warren doesn't have very much support among black voters. Now, when it comes down to Warren and Trump, people are definitely going to be voting for Warren more. There's no doubt about that. But that's just like the case was in 2016. That's not going to be enough to get her over the hump. She can't just get black votes and expect that to get it for get her into that, because a lot of black voters are going to be suspicious of whether or not she's going to be good when it comes to Black Lives Matter, when she's going to be good when it comes to when it comes to matters of legalization of marijuana, stop and frisk, the reforming of the law enforcement system. Is she going to be in favor of that? And people are not really sure. They're when it comes to, I think, majority of the Democratic, honestly, the Democratic campaigns and the Democratic politicians and candidates that are running, I think a lot of them are very kind of worried about what the Democrats are going to do when it comes to law enforcement and kind of the reforming of that system. So the next part here says Warren has made her detailed policy plans a core part of her brand on the campaign trail, and that approach seems to interest establishment Democrats too. After all, they're the type of voters most likely to actually read those proposals. Sanders is providing more of economic aspirations. She's providing more of a roadmap, said Stuart Applebaum, the president of the Retail, Wholesale, and Department Store Union, the executive vice president of the United Food and Commercial Workers International Union, and a member of the DNC Executive Committee. Even in this room, she comes across as practical, smart, he said, standing in the hotel ballroom. I think there is a sense of respect for her and the way she's conducting her campaign. I think that's kind of a veiled shot at Bernie, saying that he is more of economic aspirations. She's more of a roadmap. People have been pushing that kind of talking point, that bullshit a lot. They're trying to pretend as if her ideas are more comprehensive and more detailed than his. In reality, they're not. She's just taking a lot of the ideas from his policies and then branding it as her own. And by the way, she just recently did that with Jay Inslee. Jay Inslee's climate change, because Jay Inslee, as I've spoken before, Jay Inslee is a big climate change, advocate, and she decided to take a lot of his policies and make them her own. They literally said there was an article that said that. So yeah, I mean, she's done the same thing with Bernie, so it's not surprising. The next part here says, do the opinions of party insiders even matter anymore? The answer is a resounding maybe. DNC members are among the superdelegates whose power in the presidential nominating process was stripped last year. But all the people at the summer meeting are active and influential in local politics, and they have the potential to softly sway opinions in ways that could ripple out of their communities. The DNC members won't come together like this again for almost a year. The next meeting, announced on Saturday afternoon, is set for July 17, 2020 in Milwaukee, the day after the Democratic nominee delivers his or her acceptance speech at the next convention. Democrats have a history of summer flings with lefty insurgents ahead of presidential primaries. Think Howard Dean in 2003 and Sanders in 2015. At least for now, though, Democrats seem to be having fun watching Warren. Yeah, I'm sure they are. Most of all, she's smart as shit, Fowler told, which is Don Fowler, the same Clinton loyalist insider. Fowler told me as he tried to put his finger on why he and others like her. You don't want a dumb-ass president. Okay. Well, that's what that's what they mean. They want an Ivy League type president. They want somebody like Barack Obama, and this happens. The only person that happens to be close to that Democrats consider has electability is Elizabeth Warren. Yeah, so ultimately, this just comes down to finding somebody that is going to be subservient to the Democratic Party and all these establishment types, all these people that I've quoted, whether they're even a guy that's like, the head of a union, even him, and he's a member of the DNC Executive Committee, so he's an insider too, but he's a union, whatever, the head of a union too, which seems kind of strange, but I mean, either way, you can't trust these people that are the head of the DNC, or not the head of the DNC, but part of the DNC. And those are the people that are ultimately going to be making the decisions. And I can't trust those people to make a conscious decision that's going to improve people's lives and do what's in the best interest of regular people. So it's very troubling, and it's very troubling to see that this is the process that that's possibly we're all going to be have to be going through, and we're going to have to deal with. And I don't know, it really worries me, and I know it worries a lot of progressives out there, and it's something that we need to we have to nip it in the bud as much as possible, by garnering that the grassroots support. You have to garner as much grassroots support as possible so that you can cancel out the support that certain candidates have from the establishment. In this case, being Elizabeth Warren or whoever, Kamala Harris, Pete Buttigieg, Joe Biden, whatever it is. So whatever support those people have that Bernie Sanders potentially could take on, you need to be countered by actual grassroots progressives and leftists. And Bernie obviously has that support, in droves. And now the question is, are those people are they all going to stick with Bernie ultimately, is Bernie going to get screwed by the DNC? You know, are the party insiders going to rig this thing again? That's the question. They've definitely tried to rig it against Tulsi Gabbard. We're going to be talking about that a little bit later, but they've definitely done it against her. They did it in 2016 against Bernie. Are they going to be doing it in 2020? If they are, we're wise to it. So they're not fooling us. They're not fooling progressives in trying to make us think that, you know, like this is a totally fair process. So we're watching them. And the insiders that are saying like, well, I hope Sanders supporters don't feel like because she's cool with this, cool with the insiders that it's some sort of like, that she's an establishment type. No, that's what we think. We're wise to what Elizabeth Warren is doing. We're wise to what the establishment wants to make her into, and it's just becoming more and more clear. Every article that I cover that portrays Warren as a wonderful progressive and a big time progressive and a big time, kind of supposedly leftist type. I don't buy it at all. I don't buy it for a second. So they can think that kind of stuff. They can think that we're going to fall for that, but ultimately it's not going to be that easy. So they can think that, but ultimately we're going to be backing Bernie Sanders, and he's the person that we want to come out on top.